What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in some more Genshin Impact, and today we're going to be talking about the new 5-star character that has been officially announced. We already knew he was coming, but we can finally talk about it because we had an official live stream talking about version 3.1, which is going to end up introducing the desert biome, which is going to be absolutely beautiful. I love it, I love it, I love it. We can actually get a little bit of a sneak peek as to how the sand and everything is going to end up working, and it's just beautiful. But we're going to be talking about Cyno today. So for those of you that just want the info, here's his Ascension card. I'll put a link in the description to where you can download it if you don't want to just take a screenshot of it. But for everybody else that wants to know more information, we are going to deep dive into it. So first and foremost, the update through version 3.1 is going to end up arriving September 28th. And Cyno's banner is going to end up being first, alongside a Venti rerun, and the new 4-star character Candice is also going to end up being in Cyno's banner, of which I'll end up having an appropriate video for her. And then phase 2 is going to end up being Nilou with a rerun of Albedo. In the odd chance that you guys are planning on spending money for Cyno, obviously, you know, be careful. But I want to give you guys a quick heads up that the 2-year anniversary of Genshin Impact is coming very, very soon. It's going to be on the 28th, as far as I know. We are going to end up getting a bunch of free pulls, not a lot, maybe like 10 or 20. But most of all, the Genesis crystals in the cash shop should end up resetting, because that's what they ended up doing with the 1st-year anniversary, which means that by spending $100, you will essentially end up getting double the amount of Genesis crystals. So I'm just giving you guys a heads up to save your money and wait. So the only other thing that I gotta mention before we move on is that Cyno is going to end up using Scarabs as his plant, which of course is going to end up being a new resource found within the desert. So let's move on to his elemental skill, which is going to be Secret Rite Cosmic Soulfarer. So it performs a swift thrust, dealing electro damage to opponents along the path. When Cyno is under the Packsworn Path Clearer state, triggered by the Wolf Swiftness, which is going to end up being his ultimate ability, he will instead unleash a Mortuary Rite that deals thunderous area of effect damage and extends the duration of Packsworn Path Clearer. I know this doesn't really make that much sense. Most of all, it's because that's going to end up being other details that'll come into play later when we talk about his passives. But in the meantime, let's move on to his ultimate ability, which is going to be Secret Rite Wolf's Swiftness. So calls upon a divine spirit to possess him, morphing into the Packsworn Path Clearer. So this is where you'll end up having the buff effect of Packsworn's Path Clearer, which ends up making Cyno's normal, charged, and plunging attacks will be converted to electro damage that cannot be overridden. Cyno's elemental mastery and resistance to interruption will increase, and he gains immunity to electro charged damage. This effect, of course, will be canceled if Cyno leaves the field, and will last to a maximum of 18 seconds. And there's a very specific reason why it mentions that his ultimate ability will only last a total of 18 seconds. His E ability is going to end up extending the duration of his ultimate. Now, his ultimate ability does have a cooldown of 20 seconds, and the base duration is going to be 10 seconds. So if you can end up triggering it as many times as possible to the point where you can end up having 18 full seconds of your ultimate uptime, that means you're going to end up having 2 seconds of cooldown time, which means an energy regen set might be broken on Cyno. So his first passive is going to be gains 25% more rewards when dispatched on Sumeru expeditions. His second one, Featherfall Judgment. So this is going to end up being one of the big ones. When Cyno is in Packsworn Path Clearer, his ultimate ability, Cyno will enter the End Seer stance at intervals. So if he activates his Cosmic Soulflarer, which is going to end up being his E ability, while affected by this particular stance, he will activate the Judication effect. Now, as far as I can tell, the End Seer stance, I noticed in the video showing Cyno's ultimate ability, this weird effect ends up going off on the screen. I'm assuming that that's going to be the End Seer. And so basically it's saying that if you end up using his elemental skill ability during the time that you end up seeing this eye effect appear on the screen, that's how you'll end up getting the Judication effect, which will increase the damage of the Cosmic Soulflarer, his E ability, by 35%, and fire off 3 dust storms Stalker Bolts that deal 50% of Cyno's attack as electro damage. Dust Stalker Bolt damage is considered elemental skill damage, so not his ultimate damage. The point of this, I think, is that they're saying this isn't going to end up working with a burst build, for example. So then there's going to end up being his other passive ability, Authority over the 9 Bows. This is going to end up being another big one. So Cyno's damage values will be increased based on his elemental mastery as follows. So Packsworn Path Clearer, his ultimate abilities, normal attack damage is increased by 125% of his elemental mastery. Dust Stalker Bolt, which is again going to end up being the effect that you'll end up getting from the Judication that we just ended up explaining, that damage is going to end up being increased by 250% of his elemental mastery. So already you see that this guy's going to end up being built off EM, which means he's going to end up having some fairly strong reactions, and then with the recent Dendro element, it's actually made electro characters a lot stronger. So generally speaking, you're going to be really set up proper if you have a Dendro elemental character to end up using with Cyno. But let's move on to his constellations. So his C1 makes it so that when you use your ult, your Cyno's normal attack speed will increase by 20% for 10 seconds, and if the Judication effect from his passive is used, and then you end up triggering his elemental skill ability, the duration of this increase will be refreshed. So you essentially can end up just continually keeping yourself in that high attack speed. So oddly enough, his C2, this is incorrect. This is the information that Honey Impact has right now, but this is out of date. Okay, so Cyno's C2 is now confirmed to have 10% electro damage bonus instead of the crit rate and crit damage bonus. So you'll end up gaining 10% electro damage for 4 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times and can trigger every 0.1 second. So basically it means that you can end up having 50% extra electro damage with his C2, which is pretty nuts because that's consistent damage rather than relying on crits. His C3 is going to end up actually leveling up his ultimate ability, which is nuts. And then his C4 makes it so that when Cyno is in the Packsworn Path Clearer state, so his ultimate ability, after he triggers Electro Charged Superconduct, Overloaded, Quicken, Aggravate, if you end up triggering any sort of an electro reaction, he restores 3 energy for all nearby party members except for himself. The effect can occur 5 times within 1 use of his ultimate ability. So essentially you can kind of use him as a battery, but his ultimate is just generally really greedy. So I don't know if you would want to end up using him as a battery. His C5, of course, is going to end up increasing the level of his elemental skill, and then his C6. After using Wolf Swiftness or triggering Judication effect from his passive, Cyno will gain 4 stacks of Day of the Jackal effect. This is going to end up being another thing stacking. Absolutely awesome. So many stacking things in this game. Are you confused yet? I know I am. When he hits opponents with normal attacks, he will consume 1 stack of Day of the Jackal to fire off 1 Dust Stalker Bolt. Day of the Jackal lasts for 8 seconds, has a maximum of 8 stacks, and it will be cancelled once Packsworn Path Clearer ends. So that's his ultimate. A maximum of 1 Duststalker Bolt can be unleashed this way every 0.4 seconds, and you must first unlock his passive ability of the Featherfall Judgment. Oddly enough, it doesn't seem to say how much damage they do. I assume that they're just going to end up doing the same amount of damage mentioned previously, which is going to end up being the 250% damage of your Elemental Mastery. And so obviously his C6 is going to be absolutely busted. My recommendation is, in the odd chance that you can, his C1 is pretty dang good. His C2 is nice, but it's just raw damage rather than something as, you know, crazy as attack speed. And then his C3 obviously is going to end up helping with his ult. His C4 is not that great, and, you know, the rest of them just kind of follow through. So now with all of that said, let's talk about how you're going to end up building him, which I pretty much have my Xiangling set up in such a way that I'm going to end up just swapping all of my gear over to him, because I got quite a bit of Elemental Mastery, a pretty good amount of crit rate and crit damage, and of course there's going to end up being also the electro damage, which I'll show you what my artifacts are in a second. The weapon, I would recommend either using Deathmatch, just because the crit rate and the passive ability is really good, and if you've been playing Genshin for a long enough period of time, you should should probably have this at a high enough refinement. For myself, you know, I'm still trying to get this to R5, but then there's also going to end up being the spear that shows up in the shop sometimes for crit damage, because of course Cyno is going to scale with crit damage. He's going to get it as he ascends, is what I mean. But generally speaking, the best weapon for him is of course going to end up being the new 5-star spear, which is Staff of the Scarlet Sands. This again is going to end up being the 5-star, so it's going to scale with crit rate, which is absolutely busted. And then the sub ability of the new spear is going to be the equipping character gains 52% of their elemental mastery as bonus attack. When an elemental skill hits opponents, the Dream of the Scarlet Sand effect will be gained for 10 seconds, and the equipping character will gain 28% of their elemental mastery as bonus attack for a maximum of 3 stacks. So an absolutely busted spear for Cyno, which makes me disappointed because generally speaking, I do not recommend that you go for the weapons, just because they are atrociously bad rates when compared to the character banners themselves. And then there's going to be the artifact sets. So I would probably recommend you guys end up using Gilded Dreams. This artifact set is just set up for him 100%, because the 2-piece set is going to boost his elemental mastery, and then the 4-piece set, it's very lengthy, but work with me here. So within 8 seconds of triggering an elemental reaction, the character equipping this will obtain buffs based on the elemental type of the other party members. So attack is going to be increased by 14% for each party member whose elemental type is the same as the equipped character, so Electro. And elemental mastery is increased by 50 for every party member with a different elemental type. Each of the aforementioned buffs will count up to 3 characters. This effect can be triggered once every 8 seconds, and the character who equips this can still trigger this effect even when not on the field. That's nuts. So what I'm planning on doing is using the team that you see right here. So my Zhongli, my Kazuha, this would be Cyno, and then I would use Raiden, so that we have at least one character that is going to end up being the same element, and then the other 2 are going to end up being different. Now that said, it might be more beneficial for me to swap Raiden out just to go for the more elemental mastery, but we'll see what happens with that. I can't test it until it's there. Now obviously, you know, your artifacts are going to differ from mine. Either you'll get luckier or you'll get unluckier, because frankly speaking, as much as people try to talk about builds, this, that, and the other thing, you don't really get a choice with how random the artifacts are. I can only tell you the stats that you're going to be focusing on, which obviously you want crit damage and crit rate as the primaries, I would suggest. But if you end up getting elemental mastery or just attack and stuff like that, that's always going to end up being a good thing. So I got a pretty decent flower, a pretty decent feather, and then the goblet you want to end up having as elemental mastery, because that's what he's going to scale off of. This one is okay. I don't know. I might try and work on a better one, but generally beggars can't be choosers, right? The Sands is going to end up being electro damage, obviously, and you can see that this one actually rolled with some pretty cracked numbers for me. And then the hat is going to end up being either crit rate or crit damage, depending on what stat you're actually going for. And this ended up being a pretty good hat as well. This was the last thing that I ended up getting with him, and it was absolutely disgusting. What priority would I put towards his talents? Well, frankly speaking, the bulk of his damage is going to end up being in his ult. I would suggest that you could end up building him towards his burst. So I would suggest that if you're planning on using him as a main DPS, almost all of his damage is going to end up being from his ult. So you would level that up first, then his E ability. Obviously, those are going to end up synergizing very well, and then his normal attack. Just in terms of priority, now I'm going to be able to fully star all of these, or crown all of his attacks and talents, so I think he's going to be really, really cool, and I'm really excited to try him out. And when he ends up getting into the game and I end up getting my hands on him, I'll be able to end up making some build guide videos for you guys on how you're going to end up seeing Cyno and so on and so forth. So if you guys want to end up seeing that stuff, you can always subscribe for more. But otherwise, if that's it for you, I would appreciate if you hit like on the way out, and consider buying some of the merch to support the channel if you want to. Oh, hi, Merc. And then otherwise, have yourselves a fantastic day. I gotta get recording the Nilou and Candace videos for you guys now.